Thank you for joining the To Agility at Work meetup group meetup session today. This is the first of the meetups in 2021. We used to have a very active session scheduled in 2020, and things had slowed down at the end of the year. I was personally a little bit ill over a period of time, so part of it contributing to the slowdown in January. But we are at it again, and we are hoping to bring the best of the crop of speakers and thinking to the agility group. And my hope personally is to have as much as somebody once a week, and though I need to get to that kind of rhythm again. So thank you all for being here. And for the first meetup of the year, we have Jon Ward. And Jon Ward is an agile coach who comes from the UK. So he's in the other side of the pond, as they call it. And he has been coaching for a long time, and he's shortly coming up with a book on agile coaching, and I thought it's appropriate to bring him here today. And Jon will be talking on team coaching and team performance and agile coaching and performance related agile coaching specifically today. So with that short introduction, I thank Jon for being here, and I'm going to turn over the call to him.
Thank you very much, Shrikant. Hello, everyone. I'll just share my screen so that we can start. And somebody ask a question. So, as Shrikant said, I'm Jon Ward. I'm based in the UK. I have been an agile coach since 2007. I believe in contextual agile. I'm a SAFe SPC. I'm a less candidate trainer. I've just passed one of the few people the disciplined agile senior scrum master qualification. So I'm looking at the moment. I'm currently leading a transformation in part of British Telecom. I've got 5,000 people in my group that I'm working with. We've got over 60 squads and teams of teams. And I am coaching agile coaches at the moment. And this particular deck or this presentation is actually part of that coaching activity that we're doing within British Telecom. Before that, I was for 18 months, I was Director of Agile Transformation in Experian. And before that, I worked for Scotiabank on their MiFID II program, looking at some parts of that, doing and helping with coaching that particular team to a conclusion for the MiFID II deadlines. So that's my background. I'm in a couple of my roles, I've found that sometimes you find that the agile coaches actually are not too sure about agile coaching. So what I've done is I created a sort of program about the coaching role and how we go about doing that and so on. So some people sort of really are able to pick up on coaching. Some coaches don't realize, I felt that they didn't realize that continuous improvement applies to them as well as to their teams. So what I was looking at is how can we get agile coaches to think more about their coaching rather than, in other words, their personal development, rather than the team that they're working with. And in doing so, look at how the agile coach can actually improve the performance of the team through self-improvement, if you see what I mean. So this was the puzzle I've been working with. And yeah, I'm based in Walberswick, which is a country, it's a village on the East Coast. I'm looking out on the sea and I can see ships. And if I could go further that way, 80 miles, I would hit Amsterdam or Rotterdam. So that I'm also involved in things like, I believe in contextual agile. In other words, I like to use the tools that that actually solve the problem. I'm not really sort of wedded to one methodology, one framework, one approach. I like to take bits and pieces and bring them together and do the right thing for the client in order to get the improvement that we need. Quite a lot of coaches start as a scrum master and with a single team, and not realizing that actually there's a sort of layers of coaching. You've got a single team coach, which is basically a scrum master or a service delivery manager, and then you've got like a team or a program level coach, which might be coaching an agile release train or a program or a less type implementation or a nexus. And then you've got the enterprise coaching, which is what I do, which is about how do you change the whole organization to adopt agile working practices and so on. And in my context, I'm using a very much less, I'm not using so much the agile tools and techniques, but I'm using much more the change management processes, so lean change management and things like this, in terms of getting people to adapt and change their ways of working and so on. This deck I've got together is a question, really. I hope I've got the right picture here on the left hand side. What makes some coaches special? So we've got Jürgen Klopp there, and you may not or may not know that he went with Liverpool right the way through the season with virtually no losses last season, even though we had COVID. And he's sort of a standout soccer coach in the UK. And then I've got some National Hockey League coaches there, which I'm told are good guys as examples of good coaches. So what I'm saying is that not all coaches are equal, right? So what things do these type of coaches bring to their teams in order that they get standout results, in order that they get the performance results? So I started digging into sports coaching, and how does a sports coach look at their athletes and decide how they're going to change them. And there's a pattern that they use in order to do that. So I've started to, if you like, take some of the learnings from that environment and then try and apply them to teams in an agile context. Yeah, PDSA, plan, do, study, act. Definitely looking at how does the agile coach, and the interventions that we plan make differences to the teams and to their team's performance. And that could be at the C level when you're talking about teams of executives, or it could be at the program level when you're talking about, release trains and less teams and so on, or it could be at the Scrum Master level. And I've found that the same type of structure works at all three levels. And indeed, the bottom level, if you like, is me, myself, my agile person and the values and so on that I have. And there's some bits of this framework that I think can be applied to ourselves. So ask questions if you want. Ask questions as we go if you want, or put them in the chat, and Nina will shout them out. One of the things I thought was very, very interesting. My daughter was doing last summer was looking for university places, and in one of the sports labs that she was looking at, I found a picture of Usain Bolt, and Usain Bolt was down at Brunel University because they've got a really world-class sort of sports coaching facility there. And what I found was, and you'll see the bandages and things on Usain's body there, he was in the gym, in the lab, doing sprint actions, analyzing his movements and how he's using his muscles. I drew from that, bearing in mind this was in 2016, and he then went and did a world best, which is, I think, 9 golds out of 9 events. I think he's one of the only people that have got, apart from Phelps, I guess, but has got that type of response. So even the best need coaching was the conclusion that I drew. So even those teams that, for example, I was doing some reviews with one of the Dutch banks, and they said, oh, we don't need scrum masters anymore. Our teams are so mature. And I'm thinking, okay, so how do they continuously improve? Have they got to a plateau, or are they still improving? And surely if they did have a coach in there once or twice, maybe a quarter, maybe that coach would say to them, have you tried this, or have you tried that, or how can we improve, and so on. So I was worried about complacency, but this guy shows us that we can never be complacent. This guy shows us that we can do analysis to improve. This guy shows us that without using our brains, we can use our brains to get better performance, no matter if we're the best in the world. Okay. So in the sporting principles, I found the guidelines, and we've got quite a good national sort of sports coaching federation. And I think you've got something similar in Canada. And basically what happens is that you get an agreement between the athlete and the coach. How do you have Mr. Usain Bolt want me to coach you? What do you want to improve? What do you want to achieve? That type of agreement is a working agreement that all agile coaches need to have with their teams, with their executives. I'm coaching the Guiding Coalition on this transformation in BT, and they came at me with a very broad remit: make us better. Now it's just as much of that, right? So you do have to have this agreement. So you can't do coaching by stealth. Okay, so you've got to be complete and open and with that. In coaching, the athletes, not the coaches, the athletes set an aspirational goal. So they set that goal and they say, I want to achieve gold medal, or I want to get the Super Bowl, or I want this championship, the FA Cup, or whatever it is. And they might say, we as a team, we want to be FA top 5 finishers in the Football League by next season. So there's the goal, there's the target for the coach. Now our plan, what we need to do is to work out how to get there. So the coaches set with the team interim targets. So the interim targets are maybe in the Usain Bolt's area, there was some targets about getting out the speed with which he exited the blocks, the time when he got to a certain stride pattern. In agile teams, we can say, okay, let's think about how we would be our interim targets. It's if is our aspirational goal, which may be 3, 4, 5 months out, maybe longer. What are the interim targets? And all sports coaches have interim targets, which I think is very interesting because they help the team get to certain stages. So one of the things, we've got the Six Nations rugby just started in Europe at the moment. One of the things I heard the coach said is that we're breaking the games down into segments of 10 minutes, and we're setting our goals for the game of 80 minutes in 10-minute chunks. So I thought that was very interesting to set those interim targets, and they're setting goals for the team based on their target of winning the game. So they break their sport down into key elements. And this is kind of interesting because what I'm doing at the moment is I'm trying to get the Scrum Masters in British Telecom to start to look at how they are adapting or using Agile. And what's happening is those guys are actually starting to say, okay, so estimation, how are we doing estimation? What sort of problems are we facing? Team organization, how are we planning? Unfortunately, we've got component teams and feature teams. How are we planning with the components? There's all sorts of bits that we've broken the agile practices down to about 8 elements, and we've asked these guys questions in each of these 8 elements. And the questions answer is yes, it's like us, somewhat like us, not like us, something we want to work on, and we want to work on it now. So we've given them some breakdowns of their activities as an agile team, and this could be a team or a team of teams, and then we've allowed them to start to think about how could they improve. And this is all part of us. And then what we've said to the Scrum Masters is they could ask some of us coaches to come in and help them if they want to do something specific in their area. The other thing that you can see with Agile, with sports coaches, is that they have a plan. If you watch any of the sports games and see top level coaches, they'll have a notepad by the side of them. And on that notepad, they'll write something about the game, and they'll write something about a player, and they'll write something about improving. And then what they do is they start to look at the next week's training or the next period and start to put that plan into effect. So I get very nervous when I hear people saying, oh, I'm a situational coach. I watch the team and then I decide immediately on what I'm going to do. But I think there's a place for that. But I think there's a place, if you're going to do real performance improvement, you've got to have a bigger picture. You've got to have a great, grandiose plan. And having a coaching plan is absolutely fundamental. So you can hear, for example, after a game, the coach says, we were outplayed in defense, we're going to work on that. Or we got into the red zone, but we didn't score a football goal, okay? And we're going to work on that. So the coaches definitely have a plan, but it's a plan to improve the key element. It's not a plan to say, just like a diary saying we're going to get to the FA Cup final in 18 months time. They're very specific. They're working on very specific elements of their activity. They also use metrics. They use metrics a lot. So they'll talk about, the speed they come off the blocks. If you've got coaching a relay team, the speed of the change, the time it takes to get the individual up to a specific speed or stride. They use metrics extensively. And there's quite a lot of resistance I've found with some coaches about creating metrics and looking at the metrics that we use to analyze the performance of the teams. What's very interesting, now I'm not saying we analyze the performance of the teams to compare teams. What I'm saying is we analyze the teams in order to decide what to coach. Okay, I'm definitely not supporting metrics to do inter-team comparisons unless it's value. But I'm talking about the metrics that we use. So I'm looking at what type of metrics do I have. So it could be escape defects, it could be the commit to achieve ratio, it could be a variety of different metrics that you use, and depending on the context of that team and the situation and the context of the type of coaching agreement that you've got with that particular team. So you could use those metrics to explore. And then you might do a goal session to actually, agree what would be the improvement that the team wants. Bless you. And then what they do is they measure the outcomes. So if the metrics didn't achieve what they said, then what they would now do is adjust. Okay, so you can see that there's the Deming cycle here: plan, do, check, adjust, or plan, do, study, act. And you can see that the sporting coaches are using exactly the control mechanism that you see in the process improvement used by Agile. I can see a lot of comments in the chat. Is there some questions there?
Nothing particular, but we can take a moment if folks have any particular questions up to what Jon has had so far. We can take a few moments to discuss them before we continue on.
Nope.
Let's proceed, Jon.
Question, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So I just want to understand, for a coach, what is a thumb rule or a key indicator in the coaching that that requires further coaching, one-to-one coaching, because the basic coaching, after the basic coaching with the coachee, so if the coachee is still unable to perform as required, so what would be the next step?
I really struggle. I think coaching a single coachee is a rather rare scenario for an agile coach. I think I'm more interested in the teams. Occasionally, and over the course of the last 7 or 8 years or so, I've had somebody come to me and say, "What do you think I should do next in my career?" Okay, I've had that type of coaching session, which is, as the individual comes to you, they give you a suggestion of an area in which they would explore, and so therefore, what you would do then is bearing in mind that the coachee is in command of that relationship, not the coach. So by the type of questioning, the open questioning and so on, if you've got the individual to explore alternatives and they've thought of some new things, then that's probably about as far as you can go. Okay. And they may decide to come back to you after the coaching session, or they may not. When you're working with a team, you tend to got metrics in there that is saying, this team wants to reduce escape defects or attack legacy or whatever the particular goal is. And then you've got a metric that you can use, which is very specific to the coaching requirement.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Any more?
Let's John.
Go ahead.
No, let's continue. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So when we're starting to think about our coaching contract as an agile coach, we tend immediately to focus on the team. And I actually think that the coaching contract is more diverse than that. We tend to have a sponsor, and that sponsor could be an executive that is, leading a transformation, or it could be an executive that's responsible for the teams. Could be a head of IT, a variety of different people. But those people will actually place on us a requirement or an expectation as to why they're paying our bill, for want of a better analogy, or why they're giving us a salary. And so those sponsors have a demand on our activity and our leadership and our the way in which we're coaching, that is also something which we need to take into account when we're building our contract. The other thing that happens is that we get an organizational context. So, for example, in one of my recent jobs, they were finding that there was a market disruption. So we were getting new entrants into the markets, and they were faster, cheaper, leaner, and they were doing something similar. So basically, the context of this was that I needed to get the agile teams to reduce their cost base, and I also need to increase their time to market. And I had to look at quality as well, because the quality was slowing down the deliveries. So what the organizational context gave me was some lenses, if you like, in order to look at the team. So when we're starting to talk about coaching the team, when I was doing my team introduction session, I would talk about the business problems in the context of why this organization was moving from waterfall to agile. Okay, so I placed my coaching in terms of the organizational objectives, the objectives of the sponsor, and then specifically to look at the needs of the team. So I think when we start to look at the contract, many coaches just see the team as the driving element. And in fact, what we've got to remember is that team isn't, outside of the organization. That team is in the organization, and they are servants of the organization rather than the organization serving the team. So some people sort of, in terms of coaching, we need to get that right. And they're coaching, if you like, their activities are in the context of a wider organization. So when we're talking about setting of aspirational goals, we have to set those goals in the context of the organizational strategy. We have to look at what value they are delivering as a team. And I think that I haven't found one organization yet that I've worked in where there wasn't a question about agile value and how much value we're delivering and speed to value and all of those sort of things. So I'm thinking that we need to think of that aspirational goal typically in terms of value delivered to the customer, value delivered to the organization, and so on. We need to think about innovation. Not all teams are innovators. Most organizations don't want innovation. Most organizations want them to achieve a specific goal. So, for example, I was given money and a program to run to open it for JP Morgan to open a bank in Bahrain. If I'd have said I'm being agile and I opened a chip shop in Balham, they would not be very happy with me, right? So the innovation that all the teams have is limited to maybe their ways of working, maybe the way in which they're going to deliver, the creativity that they're going to do with deployment or minimum business increments. That may be the innovation rather than solutional innovation. But we still could have some teams which might be, exploratory agile rather than functional agile, and those may need to have innovation, and in which case, as a coach, you would be looking at innovation techniques and requirements mapping and exploration, systems thinking, and all of this design thinking and so on that you would put into those sort of environments. Most aspirational goals at an organizational level is looking for predictable highest quality and predictable speed of delivery. Not everybody is focused on speed of delivery. Sometimes high quality, if you like, outranks that. But when you're starting to talk to the teams about, I've got a problem at the moment, too many escape defects. So, when you're starting to talk to the teams, you would be saying, guys, we're getting so many defects, it's slowing us down. So I think from a coaching perspective, we might need to think about this, or you would put it perhaps as a question to say, can we start to think about this, or are you happy with the quality or whatever, so that we get the team to start to say, we think we can improve quality, or the team say, we need to do this in order to improve quality. Shrikant, you muted me there. Well, or somebody did.
I had to mute everybody because a few mics were on, so I then unmuted you. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. Okay. So the other things that you might have is team satisfaction. One of the interesting things I was talking about was, how do you know if your team's okay? And one of the one single measure was employee NPS. Would you get your best friend to come and work in this team? Would be the type of question. And that might give us some aspirational goals that said, how can we make life in this team much more satisfying, better, happy, and so on. In doing that, I don't know whether you've come across the Agile Fluency model, but there's an Agile Fluency model is really very interesting, and it gives you some indications of the type of team, the type of ways of working in a team, depending on what your team is trying to change and what your team is trying to achieve, rather. So having a look at that Agile Fluency model is really, really very nice. And I would advocate people have a look at the model, because it's not a maturity model. It's about looking at the type of the context of the team, the type of work that the team's doing, and how to blend through some of the Agile working practices and so on. So what I'm going to say to you is sports coaching is broken down into key components. They try and improve component by component. I know component's a bad word in Agile circles. They reanalyze their performance. They then pick another component in order to improve it. So they're looking at sort of continual improvement. They're looking at relentless continual improvement, to use a term, and they are making sure that everything is going in the same direction. There's a book which we've started to use in British Telecom at the moment, and it's called "Does It Make the Boat Go Faster?" And this is all about an agile, a rowing team and rowing coaches, and it's about they agreed with the team was that they would, whatever they did, it would make the boat go faster. And for example, they decided that they would not go to the Olympic opening ceremony because that would make them late back to bed. And would it make the boat go faster? They said no, so therefore they didn't go to this Olympic opening ceremony. So there's some things that we can think of that in terms of the way in which we're providing our coaching. So let's move it back to Agile, okay? So you start to observe your team and you start to look at them and you sort of think, this team really isn't getting backlog refinement, or this team, the estimation process is not working, or whatever it is. And you look at that team's performance and you sort of say to yourself, if they want to get to here, there's an intervention that's required. And that intervention is what we do as a coach in order to improve performance. What I'm saying to you is 99.9% of coaching interventions is to take a team back to core agile practices. Okay, I'm not saying the basic practices, it would be contextual. So years ago, there was a book called Situational Leadership. There was a book called The 1 Minute Manager, and it talked about situational leadership. And your interaction with the team is based on the maturity of that team. What I'm saying to you is we need to do the same in an agile context. So if the team is, using a huge amount of test automation or whatever, the type of intervention that you would use is not the same in terms of a team that's just starting out on BDD. So you would ground that intervention in agile wisdom and take them back to core values. You definitely want the team to be continuously improving, but maybe they've gone away from the core value too much and we need to bring them back, or the core wisdom. So I'm definitely of the opinion that we need to justify our intervention based in agile wisdom. And we might take the wisdom from, Scrum, we could take it from SAFe, we could take it from Lean, we could take it from XP, we could take it from Less, wherever. I don't mind where it comes from, but we need to be explicit about what is the agile wisdom we're using, and therefore what would be our expected outcome. So if we expect to reduce escape defects by 50%, you would go back to the quality assurance methods, maybe team up mex for Scrum, maybe BDD, maybe, I don't know, TDD, depends on what you're doing, and say, okay, how are we going to justify that? So we've got an intervention that's designed based on your observation, based on your contract with the team. We're using agile wisdom to actually define what it is we're going to do. And let's face it, not all coaches, as coaches, we don't know everything, right? So what we've got to do is there might be a bit of book work that's needed. There might be a bit of Google. There might be a bit of reading blogs or whatever to go back to the agile wisdom that we need to use. So basically your intervention is based on your analysis of the team performance, and we've got measured outcomes. So we're looking at what the expected outcome is and then what the actual outcome is. And those two things could be quite different, because if we've got a different outcome than the one we expected, then maybe we need to revise our coaching plan. Okay. So I like the concept of guided retrospectives. I like that very much because, guided retrospectives help you guide the team, because the team's asking you to improve their performance. The team's asking you to get them easier, make their life easier or whatever. Sometimes you can use things like, if anybody's come across the disciplined agile process blades, you can look at, say, requirements gathering and say, what's the techniques we're using now? You can actually say, well, why don't we try this? And I don't like having a retrospective without an experiment. So if the team's not got an experiment, then are they really serious about continuous improvement? So I you know, the one thing that somebody said to me that really struck home in the last 12 months is, if my team is doing the same as today in 3 months' time, then I failed as a coach because they're not continuously improving. So there's some really, I really like this guided retrospective approach. I like the process blades that are in Disciplined Agile, and you can actually look down them and so on. And if you haven't got the Disciplined Agile book, I think it's called Choose Your Wow, just looking at it, then I'd recommend that you have a good look at it. So what we're saying is that we're looking to adapt that coaching plan based on the outcome. So we've got an anticipated outcome that's based on Agile wisdom. We've got an actual outcome. So the question would then be, why a difference? Now, when Srikanth mentioned my book at the outset, and one of the things I did was I passed my book around a number of people that I really valued. And one of the guys is a real coaching, individual professional coaching buff. And he said to me, you've forgotten reflective practice. And reflective practice is basically where a coach sits back and says, why have I got a difference? What did I do? What could I have done better? How can I improve that next time? So this is, if you like, the coach's retrospective on the coaching. So this is looking at how do we as coaches get better in our interaction with our teams, okay? And it may be that you've got to look at, well, I didn't really deal with that individual very well, or I allowed a conflict to happen, or I chose a mentoring path and I probably should have done teaching, would be another type of reflection. Sometimes I use coaching buddies. I've got a coaching buddy that we can go into a peer review session. Sometimes I've got I just do this and I go for a walk on the beach near my house and just reflect what happened there and could I have handled that better. So there's a number of different paths that you could do this, but I really do advocate that you should think about, why is there a difference between the anticipated outcome and the actual outcome? Because 9 times out of 10, it'll be to do with the coach rather than to the team. So with a peer or a mentor was what I've got there. Okay. So the coaching plan, what does it look like? Well, actually, I just use a PowerPoint slide. I do look at the observation. I sort of look at it, and bearing in mind, God gave us 2 ears, 2 eyes, and only 1 mouth. I tend to make sure that I really do observe it. So I'm not just basing an intervention based on one observation, but I'm looking at a trend or a pattern that I could look at for observation. Then I decide what intervention style, what intervention I'm going to do, and what sort of style I'm going to use. So when I'm talking about intervention styles, I'm talking about Lisa Adkins' Agile Coaches Framework, competency framework. In there, we've got 4 coaching styles, which is teaching, mentoring, facilitating, and coaching. Okay, so sometimes, and it will depend on your team maturity, and it will depend on the circumstances. Sometimes you might have to go into coaching mode. If they already understand what you're doing, then you might need to go into mentoring mode. Sometimes you'll have to go into facilitation mode. Nearly every retrospective, you're in facilitation mode rather than teaching mode. So you need to plan what you're going to do and what style you're going to use, and then ground it in Agile wisdom. So I've got this, I've got the Less book. Craig and Baz says, this is a good idea, try this, avoid that, which is a fabulous part of the second Less book. So you would then take that and look at that and say, okay, based on the Agile wisdom, based on my SAFe training, my Scrum training, my BDD training, or whatever, I've got, this is what I'm going to use. This is why I think it'll work. And then what we get into, anticipated outcome. Once we've got that plan with the anticipated outcome and we run the intervention, then we can start to say, okay, what was the actual outcome against what I planned? And then you can start to say, okay, what am I going to do next time? That's not necessarily next time with this team. It's next time I do that type of intervention. So that's a simple coaching plan. And how you start to track them together is kind of interesting, because this type of, oh yeah, that's this one other thing. So having a coaching plan with a rough structure can enable other coaches to learn from what you've done. So you can help, it will increase the knowledge base of your teams. It increases the knowledge base of coaching techniques. It's about coaches using the same agile wisdom. And if you get a coaching plan, you can start, if one coach, let's say, heaven forbid, somebody goes sick or something like this, if one coach has to pick up the work of another coach, then you can see where the other guy was going and this sort of thing. So it's basically using peer review and inspect and adapt and so on. So here's the model, and you can see the interventions we've got here. They're in the center pieces. On the left-hand side, teaching, mentoring, facilitating, coaching. Okay, that is exactly the situational leadership that was advocated by Ken Blanchard in the 1 Minute Manager and subsequent academic papers. And that would teach you to, look at the maturity of your team and decide what type of intervention you should actually use. So this is the process. So you would have, with a very experienced team, you'd start with teaching. You would then move to mentoring, ignore the bottom 3 mastery areas. You'd then go to facilitating, and then you go to professional coaching. You only go to professional coaching when the team understands all of what you're trying to intervention, and let the team actually then decide. So that's a team that's really starting to experiment, to continuously improve and so on. If you've got a new team, you're going to spend your time in the left-hand side teaching and mentoring and occasionally facilitating.
Would we want to pause for a moment for any questions, John?
Yeah, why not? We've got, we're at 45, yeah.
A couple of points which I wanted to derive or ask you is that one thing that you saw is when you have a team agreement, I always believe that I have a multi-team agreement, with multiple teams at the same time if they're working together, because of the fact that if you locally try to optimize a team, they're not thinking of the bigger context of optimizing across multiple teams. That's what do you think on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I would, if I was going to do a coaching contract with that scenario, I would do that with the team of teams rather than individual squads. So that, because the type of problems, and this was why I talked about the levels of agile coaching, the type of problems that you have with teams of teams are totally different to the type of problems that you face with individual teams. So yeah, totally agree. I would hesitate to produce a coaching contract with a whole department or a whole business. That would be kind of like too
Yeah,
big.
it'll be too large and too vague. Yeah, certainly.
And and you'd have to generalize it far too much in order to allow you to get some measurable results from that. Excuse me, water went the wrong way. Yeah.
Any other questions from the group before we move on?
Okay, so we're nearly there actually, Shrikant. So
thank you.
I'm talking about a coaching plan with measurable interim targets. You remember the sports analogy? What they were doing is breaking the game down into, in the rugby game, 10-minute segments. In the sprint game, time off the blocks and getting into stride, and time to first hurdle or time for baton change and so on. Let's look at a scenario where we've got predictable delivery is our problem, or as the team is saying we're unpredictable. So we could find that we might do some improvement of the requirements. We might do some better planning in order that we would get to predictable delivery, right? So let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. So what we would do is actually create an intervention plan or a coaching plan that's around ATDD on PO training, okay? And then we get another coaching plan that is about better planning, sprint planning, story estimation. And then we've got another coaching plan, which is around reducing the deplex and stabilizing the velocity and so on. So we might use a different technique in each one of those activities. So let's face it, we've done a lot of training on ATDD. So we might need to go into mentoring mode because we've done the training, the team understand it, but they're having difficulty in applying it. In the PO training, well, our PO is a new guy or new lady, and they might need some basic product owner training. We might need to look at backlog refinement and so on. And so therefore we might have to go into teaching mode. In the sprint planning, they understand that. Okay, come on. So let's start to facilitate that session. Let's use a different type of approach and let's start to look at how we can facilitate that. Let's use a facilitating style where we're questioning and answering and enabling the team to think about better ways of doing things. And then lastly, we could use training and coaching in the defects and the velocity area. So I'm not saying to you, think of one plan and use the same technique. I'm saying, think of a plan and then use the appropriate technique for the circumstances that you're trying to improve. Does that make sense? So all of this is part of my my coach's cookbook, which will be hopefully coming out from Austin Macaulay shortly. It's been held up by COVID, unfortunately. And when it comes out, I'll let Srikanth know so you know about it. But at the moment, it's over a year that it's been with the publishers.
I just want to pause you for a minute. There is a question from Nawaz Butt asking, how far would a typical coaching plan go? Nawaz, you want to give some context to that question to John?
Yep. So the coaching engagements are so there is a pattern in the industry that these are usually short-term gigs, like at how it is trending, and it is supposed to be a long-term play. So I'm just trying to understand, like in the real context, like where and how far you want to create a landscape of things that you want to cover for the teams with respect to your coaching plans. So if you can, and how frequently you want to visit your plans, and how you like the whole inspection, adapt, how you bake those values into your plans.
It's a very, very good question. Thank you very much. I personally use the quarterly planning window, you know, with a team. But that said, that you're doing interventions in sprints, so maybe they're doing 2-week or 3-week sprints, and look at how we're going with each one of the interventions, because you can't pile all the interventions into the same sprint because you'll kill the team and kill their performance. So you've got to look at the plan, do, check, act. But the 3-month window, I'm a firm believer of the 30, 60, 90 outcome-based plan, right? And I think that's probably the way to phrase it. And that goes back to Agile wisdom again, looking at quarterly wave planning and improvements and PI planning, dare I say, and looking at creating a longer term view. You're not going to get a team, as you and I know, from, if we've got a predictable delivery problem, we're not going to achieve that in a single sprint. It's going to take us 3 or 4 sprints to get to it. So you're already with 3 or 4 sprints, you're talking about a couple of months. So a quarterly plan seems to be the type of thing that I would go with.
And something to add to that would be coaches who know what is the right plan to prioritize based on the context of the situation. So if you do not have that underlying characteristic that the coaches are capable of identifying what is most valuable to the team in that 30, 60, 90-day window, then you are potentially working in a non-systematic manner.
Well, I think that's why you drag back to agile wisdom, you know, because that helps you understand that as well.
That's correct, Jon.
Other questions then? Thank you, Nawaz. That was really a great question.
One more, sorry, if I may.
Yeah, no problem.
This is Nawaz again. So, where do you draw the line for a coach? Like, because you see that the devil is in the details, isn't it? So, I mean, where do you draw the line as a coach where you tend to differ the details? So maybe wearing these different hats as a like is it I suppose it's not linear when you talk about teaching, coaching, mentoring. How do they overlap each other, and how you determine what stance you need to take in different situations? Maybe if you can maybe shed some light on uh, wearing these different hats at different times in a given context.
So if you're looking at training, you've got an inexperienced team or a team that doesn't understand the topic that you're going to be introducing them to or you want them to take on. If you go to the other extreme where you're in coaching mode, the team is tightly driving the content. And if you like, you're providing a little bit of the process, the powerful questions or whatever. So 100% content in training, absolutely zero content in coaching. Okay. The next one from training is mentoring. And when you're mentoring, you can be dropping back into training mode. You can be using examples to illustrate a concept, a technique. You might walk them through a technique or a tool, and basically you would allow them to explore. You're probably, there's probably a 50-50 content and conversation type piece. So thinking that, people learn most by, if you think of the 70-20-10 principle of adult learning, 70% of learning happens by doing, 20% by studying, and only 10% by training. So you want to try and get them into that mentoring space and that facilitating space, because that's when they start to really learn by doing. Okay, so it would depend on the maturity of the organization and the team as to how you would approach each of the subject areas. But if the team knows nothing about it, you're inevitably going to be doing some training.
And generally, you cannot train, you can't mentor or coach without some underlying training in place. So if people don't know the game, you can't mentor or coach your way to the game directly. Would that not be true, Jon?
Yeah, that's very true. Sadly, with the Agile certification factories, and I'm being quite disparaging, we've got to have a certificate for this and we've got to have a certificate for that. They introduce generic concepts, but when you start to get into an organization, you need to do the way of each organization has its own uniqueness. So the type of learning that they come off, let's say a Scrum Master's course from scrum.org, and then we would use them in British Telecom, they may have some different constraints. We've got component teams and we've got travelers and ambassadors, which they may not have learned about in the standard class. So inevitably, as a coach, even if they've gone on to the, if you like, the basic certification, you still need to do some adaptive training. You still need to make it specific to your organization.
I want to move on to a different track, Jon. There's a question on the chat from Andre asking about how about coaching executives as opposed to teams? So he's asking you from the perspective of when and how do you coach executives?
What was the second? What executors?
The executives in the organization, the senior management and the executive in the organization.
The executives.
Yes.
How do you coach them?
Right, Andre, you want to give some context directly to Jon about your question?
Yeah, sure. So my question is basically, I know the focus generally is on coaching teams, but usually the problems in organizations is you have executives that don't really understand some of the practices, and I mean that's when their demands start to be oriented on velocity. They pick up the velocity and then they go ahead with it. But that's where I think all this engagement of coaches is lacking, which is on the executive side.
Absolutely. I totally, Andre, that's a great question. Totally 100% agree with you. What we've got here in this example is a coaching plan that is around a team, right? Because that's what most of us can very quickly relate to. I've just done in British Telecom, we've done a training course, a training program, a mindset, sort of middle management level mindset training for about, well, since March through till September. So we've done about 6 months, and we probably run a middle management training course about once every 2 weeks. And they've been very well attended, 20, 30, 40 managers on a course. And it's been about the mindset and trusting the teams and moving away from utilization as a key metric and all of these sort of things. And then what we did was we ran a survey of team members. And in fact, it was all the way across the group that I'm working with. I think we had something like 2,000 responses to this. It was a Menti type survey, one of these word cloud type analysis, which comes back, and we picked up that we've got, management attitudes, and we've got processes, and we've got other different impediments, if you like, to agile practices based on the infrastructure, the ecosystem, the belief structures, and so on. So we're now looking at how to improve that. And we started off by doing some form, we've done some examples, because I'm a firm believer of evidence-based management. So what we've done is we had in December, we had what we called an Agile Fest. We had over 500 attendees, and we ran 23 odd sessions in a day, talking about how this particular function was becoming more agile, that particular function was becoming more agile, and so on. And now what we've just done is what we've called the Agile Ice Bucket Challenge. And the Ice Bucket Challenge is, okay, have a look at, with your management team, do a retrospective and have a look at what's stopping you being agile, and then look at that impediment and decide an experiment that you can use to reduce the impact of that impediment or remove it. So we're doing that right now, and the goal is therefore to get each of the managerial teams, the middle management layer, to start to think about what is slowing their teams down, what is making them less agile, and so on. So once they've got that, then they can start to do experiments, and then we've called it an ice bucket challenge, because once they've done their experiment, then you can challenge another team or another manager or another group to do something similar, and they're posting it on a internal Facebook page and games, and we're playing games. But basically what we're doing is we're increasing the pressure on the middle management layer to change, and we're providing them with the facilities to do that, and we're providing them with training, we're providing them with mentoring. We're just about to start with facilitated sessions. We've got the middle management layer has probably since April had a community of practice. Now I've seen people do community of practice for product owners and communities of practices of scrum masters, but why not middle managers? So we've got a community of practice of middle managers, and they're starting to share ideas amongst themselves. The making the boat go faster was one of the examples of the community practice activities for middle managers. We've also used something called tiger teams and things like that, or something about a tiger, but I didn't attend that one, so I haven't got the name of the book. But we've got book clubs and things like this to help them. So I think, Andre, we've got to concentrate on in order to make an organizational more agile, we've got to look at all the layers in the organization. We've stopped senior managers from talking about speed of delivery and cost, and we're starting to get them to talk about behavior change. So Monday this week, we had a show and tell, and we talked about all the training we've done and the behavior change and how we were coaching coaches and what else was happening. And this management team has picked that up and really sort of very, very happy with the outcomes and the progress and so on. But it's a long journey.
I had a related question, John, is you talk a lot about experiments. One of the challenges that I see when I coach in large organizations is that they are not open to the word experiments in the first place. So how did you cross that bridge of getting acceptance that experiments are okay?
Because when you get resistance to change, what I've done is used evidence-based management, right? And so I'm not talking about a grandiose experiment. So we might be saying, for example, we've got, I think there's 11 feature squads in one of the areas. And we've said with one feature squad, we're going to change the way in which they do testing. That's going to give us some estimations. That's going to give us some results. That's going to give us some evidence. And based on that evidence, we will either continue with the experiment with other teams, or we will change the experiment. So maybe with another squad. So getting a manager to say, we're going to change the whole way we're going to plan resources, you get huge amounts of resistance. But if you go to a manager and say, for this team, for this particular area, which might be, I'd say 10% of the 10% of the resource pool, we might be saying, let's do something slightly different, and encourage them to talk about what could we do different. You know, the way in which we talk to our agile squads is the same way that we talk to our executive levels. How do you think you could improve? Think about the retrospectives, right? How do you think you could improve? You're not going to go in there as a coach and say, I think you should improve this. What we're doing is we're saying to the execs, how can you improve? I mean, the one big thing in British Telecom, at least, is that we've got, you know, Philip Janssen, the CEO, sort of standing on tables and shouting out, we want to become more agile. We want to become more agile. How is our agile progressing? So we've got huge amounts of buy-in at the senior leadership. We've got buy-in at the team level, and we're trying to, you know, what I call the frozen waste in the middle, and we're trying to solve that. And the way in which we're doing it is by, let's try something, let's test something. How do you think you can improve it? What do you think? And as long as we don't go into the operational risk space, right, and that we're enhancing operational risk, and none of us as coaches would diligently or expect to go into, you know, doing something which is operationally risk challenging, then unless we're doing it with very strict controls, you know, the people are open to new ideas and things.
Thanks, John. That's a good point. I just noted down in my notes for today that that's really a key thing, that if you're going after the non-risky change, that would improve things. And if there are high risk change, then you're deliberately aware of it and then working towards it. Then that kind of reduces the notion of how experiments are looked at.
Yeah, you've got to be very careful.
Good point. I love it.
Any more questions? I can see the chat window going up.
Yeah, some people have been dropping. I think the lunch hour is coming to an end here, unfortunately.
Okay.
So
I can see a lady just come on video. So hello.
Hello. I was just laughing, so because the frozen waste in the middle, did I understand it right?
Those guys in the middle, don't forget middle management.
Yeah, you said frozen waste in the middle, right? Didn't you?
Yes, I called
Oh,
it.
okay, that was
Waste.
quite funny. So because that's what we tried to, and I was really excited that you said they have also COPs. That's quite interesting. So because I cannot imagine in my organization.
It really works very well too. I think, you know, we talk about the mindset, we talk about agile values. We don't use a lean coffee approach to these guys. We tend to do, you know, a topic. We get maybe the HR people or the quality people or whoever is, or maybe even finance, heaven forbid. But we maybe get those guys in and talk about, you know, things like funding initiatives and skill upskilling and all of those sort of things. But we regularly, every 4 or 5 sessions, do a sort of mentee that says, what are the things you think we should talk about next? They're very, very well attended. You know, there's something like, bearing in mind we've got 5,000 people in the division. There's over 100 and some odd people going into this session on a regular 3 weekly basis.
Yeah, because I thought it's only like component-based stuff because we're like doing less transition now. So, and that's why it's not component. I did not really consider these guys a lot for the moment. So, and I think maybe it's a really great idea just to involve them somehow, that they also more like in the supporter role, not like even frozen waste in the middle.
Well, you know, those guys have got vested interest, right? Because they're probably the people that are most impacted by Agile. Okay, because you've got things like they've got to their position because they know something. They've got to their position because they check people or they command and control or whatever. They've got to their position because they are specialists in a certain area. When you start to introduce teams and give the teams responsibility, those middle managers have lost their powers, their life reasons, their career structures, all sorts of things. So you've got to provide something for those people, and you can't ignore them, right? You've got to do. And I use the ADCAR model, or in fact, I use a model called Explain, Excite, Enable, Embed, which is a sort of change model. And so you need to think through those. How are you explaining to those guys? How are you exciting them about the future? How are you enabling them through training, coaching, mentoring, or whatever? And then how you're going to embed the practices. And, you know, part of that is removing impediments and organizational blockers and behaviors. In one of my clients, we had a big hero culture. And that hero culture was, unless you had Fred on your team, your project was going to fail. Because Fred always gets the team out of trouble. And once we started to say, you know, what we want is 100 Freds and not just Fred, that Fred, first of all, Fred got very unhappy about that. But also the managers had to change their understanding about how and which we're going to motivate these teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot. So I'm just like kind of not really in the beginning, but it's almost 1 year. And they start to feel like kind of they have to do something and they have to support the teams, but they don't know how. So now that's my turn to support them as well. So
yeah, so I would run some workshops about, you know, how can we change, what would we want to change, and then I get them to come up with their improvement plan. What, you know, maybe use the goal approach, and say, okay, what are the things you can do? What's reality? What are the things you're starting to use? You know, I know that we use goal for individual development, but it's great for teams. And you could use I'm picturing a mural board where you have, you know, the ideas being generated and do a brainstorming approach, and then move some of those ideas into let's experiment, let's try these, see what works, see what doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree that middle layer is definitely a challenge because, you know, Agile Scrum doesn't really have a place. I see in the comments, you know, people are talking about more doers, less middle management. But sometimes it's a matter of, you know, figuring out where that role is. You know, if you have a whole bunch of business analysts, you know, can you align them with product owners and have them help, in that refinement process, writing user stories? You don't always need just one person in every role. If you have a large enough project, you really need that support staff. And even though it's not, quote, defined, and everybody talks about these lean, tiny teams, to make things work in a large organization, you don't need to throw everyone away per se, but use them for what they're great at. And at that middle layer, the people who were the managers of managers, I worked in a company where I literally got them to like set up a very simple Kanban board and said, lay all your future projects and current projects, into this board view and work in an agile way. Right. So, the project management office then starts to be agile instead of being the old school in conflict with agile teams. They become agile and they start looking at the upcoming projects in that agile way. And then, they become part of the solution, so to speak, but, and more effective at what they do.
You're absolutely right, Doug. And in fact, I find that, the first place, if you're doing an agile transformation, the first place to start is the PMO, because you need to get those guys to go agile first and have a framework that enables them to do what they need to do and the organization needs them to do, but which doesn't impede the agile teams, right? And I've had quite a couple of situations where I've started to work at the team level and then realized that the PMO was blocking us. The other thing I've done with middle management is actually to move them into coaches, because they've got some people skills, because they've got interpersonal, they've probably been coaching anyway as part of their middle management role. What we've done is given them and started to help them to understand some of the agile wisdom in order to move forward. And I've got 3 at the moment that is in one of my cohorts that I'm training coaches, that are absolutely superb in terms of their capabilities. So, for example, one of the managers, we did an hour's training on bigger and planning, and one of these managers, who's a design manager or something, or he was, ran a bigger and planning session with 7 squads simultaneously, with him and another couple of scrum masters that he trained in order to do it. And I just sat back and thought, well, here am I, a safe SPC. I was expecting to get involved in this, and I wasn't needed, So they're just really good. And I think you're right. You should look at, some middle managers won't be able to make the change. Some middle managers will completely get it and be able to lead the charge, and other people will need convincing. And you just need to work with the guys in the right way.
And these middle management systems have been built over decades, John. It's fault of the system that has been built over a long period of time. So we can't just delay it or expect themselves to dispense themselves out of the process as well.
No, because those systems have been honed and improved over years because of problems, challenges the organizations met. So there's a certain amount of belief in those systems that you need to overcome when you're starting to adapt.
Oh, for sure.
Which is why experiments are so important, because then we've got an evidence base to say, this is what I'm doing. I've used agile wisdom. This is the wisdom. You're not just saying, oh, it's because Sophia or John or Doug or you said so. It's because this is what other people, this is the academic background to what I'm doing, and so on.
Yeah, I see the comment in there about starting with smaller groups too. I was involved in a large transformation, and it was successful because we literally did pilot. It wasn't, hey, let's rip everything off in this company and, start fresh for everyone. But we did small groups in the web development group, which was more, agile to start with, more open to change than, say, somebody who had been working in a very traditional area with a mainframe for a long time. So, we saw the success, we're able to build on that. And then those people literally within the company culture became advocates. And, people would accuse me of saying, wow, as a consultant, it's like you're trying to work yourself out of a job. And I'm like, well, yeah.
Exactly what you got to do. Yeah, exactly.
You're successful. then I won't need to be here and it'll be sustainable. I mean,
Yeah.
I can make change, but it's not going to be the best change if I still have to be here. So
It's called I heard it today. It's called the coach's Nanny McPhee model. You know, if you don't want me and you need me, I'll be here. But if you think you need me and you don't, sorry, if you think you want me but you don't need me, then I'll be gone. So it's sort of that type of approach, you know. Yeah. So Shrikant, okay?
Yeah, I think we made good progress. I think half the participants have left so far. The lunch hour was over, so slowly we have got dropping in.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to wrap up with Jon. We've taken an hour and 15 minutes of his time. So I would like to thank Jon once again for being here. Perhaps in a few months' time, we will bring him back on a different subject again, on a related topic.
More than welcome.
I'm really happy that there was active conversations and questions to Jon, not a presentation that somebody nods their head to. You know, people are challenging him, so really appreciate that, and also the participatory nature. And we hope to bring such speakers again back if that's valuable to you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'll give you the deck so that you can share it. And
Yes.
If anybody wants to reach out to me and ask questions, I'm more than willing to learn from you and get the and exchange views and so on.
So thank you, Jon. We'll certainly do that. While we send out the YouTube link, we'll also send the link to Jon's deck and his contact details and how one might reach him, a variety of channels through which you could reach Jon, and I'll circulate that to the whole meetup group. So expect that in a day or two, so you all get access to
So
that.
could you hold back? I'm going to do a similar session in the UK to this next week. So could you hold back if you're going to publish it on YouTube until
No
after
problem, Jon. Absolutely welcome. I will edit it and keep it ready. And once you give the go ahead, we can certainly do that.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. So good night, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone to be here. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
In a couple of weeks.
Hello, Shrikant.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is Alberto.
Yes. Hi, Alberto.
Hi. Nice one.
So thank you. And in a couple of weeks, we will have Dave
Thank
Snowden
you.
speaking on complexity, and we'll send out the details as well to all of you. Thank you so much again for being here.
Bye now.
Bye then.